Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Krieger, and I'm here with Dr. Ilana Katzand. We're both from Mount Sinai in New York, but we're here at the ECTRIMS conference in Berlin, Germany, talking about multiple sclerosis. And in particular, you've done a lot of work in diet and MS, and looking at how we can influence MS through behavioral and lifestyle changes. Of course, what every MS patient asks us,
Right.
what kind of diet should I be on? And
Right.
trying to answer that requires some of these steps.
Right.
So
These things just have to be done. So I'll tell you a little bit about our poster,
Okay.
where we used our colleague Dr. Samowski's reserve cohort,
Right.
and we looked at the baseline data in our group of patients with early MS who volunteered to be in the study and had this really, really nice detailed neuroimaging and clinical data captured, and
Right.
they also completed a food frequency questionnaire.
So this is people with MS less than 5 years.
Yes.
So as you said, early MS.
Early MS, young patients.
Right.
And what we did was, in particular, we were interested in fatty acid intake.
Okay.
Because that's something that has been reported in the basic science literature.
Sure.
There are some small, pieces of work that are epidemiologic in nature, like associative, looking at fish intake and things like that.
Right.
And so we were very interested in fatty acid intake. And so we looked at the intake of monounsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, and saturated fats.
Okay.
And we were surprised because we didn't find an association in terms of polyunsaturated fats
All right.
or saturated fats.
Okay.
But what we did find was an association between intake of monounsaturated fats and measures of brain matter atrophy.
Understood.
Namely, the primary measure we were looking at was cortical thickness. And we chose to focus our study, all of the studies that we're looking at in diet are really focusing in on these measures because we think that some of these things may be neuroprotective.
Sure.
And gray matter atrophy, as you know, is the measures that are most closely associated with disability.
Right.
At the end of the day.
And in particular, like you said, with things like cognition and fatigue,
Exactly.
measures of brain function.
Exactly. So we found a really interesting relationship. We divided our group into tertiles of intake, and we found a clear relationship in terms of intake of monounsaturated fats and cortical thickness.
Okay.
And further, what I think is actually the most interesting point is that we know that there's a relationship between T2 lesion volume and cortical thickness, right? So the more T2 lesions you have, the worse your cortical thickness is going to be.
Right.
What was really interesting is that among the patients who had a high intake of monounsaturated fats, that relationship actually is really attenuated and becomes almost flat. So it seems like, from a theoretical standpoint, perhaps this really is a neuroprotective phenomenon that we're observing.
That's a great point. A modulator of the effect of disease on cortical integrity.
Exactly. It also, a lot of times we think about the neurodegenerative process in MS and we think about parallels to aging, and we wonder if some of these observations are just things that you would notice in healthy people.
Sure.
But that particular observation shows that there is actually a disease-specific relationship here.
That is quite right.
Which we thought was really interesting.
Anything else that you're working on in diet that we should include here? Forward-looking things.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about two interventions that I think are pretty interesting. One is ours. But first, I'll tell you about another great poster that I saw, which was by Dr. Brenton and Dr. Goldman at UVA. And what they did is they looked at a modified ketogenic diet, which is a hard thing to do
for children and adults.
Exactly, it's a hard thing for anyone to do. So I think it's great that they did it, because ketogenic diets have, at least in basic science literature, again, all kinds of potential benefits in terms of inflammation and neuroprotection. And so what they did was they wanted to do a feasibility study, because, as we're saying, it's a hard thing to do, and who knows if you'd be able to get people to commit to doing it or to actually do it. But they actually recruited 20 patients, and they followed the ketogenic diet for 6 months, and they saw improvements in fatigue and depression, as well as improvement in measures of insulin sensitivity, and decrease in leptin levels,